My name is Jessica Reed. Whenever I look back on my life, I see a series of doors opening, some leading to joy, others to heartache, but all of them guiding me to where I am today. I grew up in a small, wind-blown town just outside of Denver, Colorado. The place was so quiet you could hear the church bell ring from the other end of Main Street every Sunday morning. Life there was never easy. My parents worked blue-collar jobs, my dad drove trucks for a living, and my mom cleaned houses in the city. Money was always tight. I shared a room with my younger sister Leah, and our biggest luxury was the old bookshelf crammed with hand-me-down novels from the local library. But even as a kid, I had dreams that stretched further than the endless sky above the Rockies. I'd watch the planes pass overhead, tracing their paths and wondering where they might land, what kind of people were sitting inside, and what kind of adventures they were having. My curiosity and restlessness only grew stronger as I got older. I studied hard, joined every club I could, and when I was old enough, I worked after school at the diner on the edge of town. That diner job is actually where I learned how to talk to anyone about anything, a skill that would serve me well later in life. After high school, I was determined to get out and see more of the world, but college seemed out of reach financially. That's when the idea of joining the army first took root in my mind. I wanted something different, something that would not only let me serve but also help me become someone I could be proud of. My family was nervous about my choice, but they understood. On my 23rd birthday, I enlisted in the U.S. Army, ready to trade the familiarity of Colorado for something entirely unknown. My basic training was grueling, but I thrived on the challenge. I learned to trust my instincts, push through exhaustion, and rely on the strength of the people around me. My superiors noticed my knack for organization and problem solving, so they sent me to logistics school. I never thought that being able to juggle bills and plan my family's meals would turn into a valuable military skill, but that's exactly what happened. By the time my orders came in, I was ready to go wherever they needed me. My first posting overseas was in Germany, at a base just outside of Stuttgart. I'll never forget stepping off the plane for the first time. The air smelled different, crisper somehow, and there was a sense of possibility in every corner of the ancient city. My job was demanding, but I quickly fell in love with the rhythm of military life and the thrill of being somewhere entirely new. I'd get up early, run along the river before the sun rose, and then throw myself into my work tracking supplies, coordinating shipments, and making sure that every piece of equipment found its way to the right place at the right time. The Army became my second family. There's a unique bond among soldiers who live and work together so far from home, sharing stories and laughter in the mess hall or over a quick cup of coffee. I made friends with people from all over the United States: New Yorkers, Texans, Californians, each of us carrying pieces of our homes with us. On weekends, we'd pile into someone's car and drive to little villages in the countryside, exploring castles, hiking forest trails, and learning German phrases that always made the locals smile. A year later, I was transferred to Italy, to a base on the outskirts of Florence. If Germany had felt like stepping into a history book, Italy was like walking into a painting. My apartment overlooked narrow cobblestone streets lined with flower boxes, and every day after work I wandered the city, drinking in the art, the food, the music. I even picked up enough Italian to chat with the vendors at the markets and order espresso like a local. Even though my days were filled with duty, my nights and weekends belonged to me, to discovery and adventure. But if there was one thing I cherished more than my career or my travels, it was my husband, Mark Reed. Mark and I met the summer before I shipped out at a backyard barbecue in Boulder. He was the kind of man who drew people to him: easy smile, quick wit, eyes that crinkled at the corners when he laughed. I was drawn to his confidence and the way he made even a simple conversation feel electric. We hit it off instantly, and after a whirlwind courtship, we got married in a small ceremony at my parents' church. Mark promised to wait for me while I built my career overseas, and I promised to never let the distance come between us. Even after our wedding, my deployment orders kept me on the move. Mark stayed behind in Charleston, South Carolina, where we'd bought a charming little house not far from the ocean, a white two-story with blue shutters. An old oak tree in the yard, and enough space for us to grow into a family one day. I always pictured us sitting on that front porch together, sharing coffee in the mornings, talking about our dreams and our plans for the future. The army paid me well, and I made sure that nearly half of my monthly paycheck, about $2,500, was wired straight to Mark. He used it to cover the mortgage, keep the house in shape, and take care of anything else he needed. It felt good to provide for us both, to know that my work was building a life for us back home. We talked every night, no matter where I was. Mark would tell me about his days, and I would share stories about Europe, the friends I'd made, the places I'd seen, the little things that made me laugh. Sometimes I worried that the distance might change us, but Mark always reassured me. He said he loved me more than anything, that he was proud of me, and that he couldn't wait for the day we'd finally be together for good. Looking back now, I realize how deeply I believed in that dream, in Mark, and in the life I thought we were building together. I thought love was enough, that it could stretch across oceans, withstand the years, and turn any house into a home. But as I would soon discover, life has a way of revealing truths when you least expect it, and not every story unfolds the way you hope it will. After nearly 2 long years of deployments, assignments, and restless nights in unfamiliar beds, my life abroad felt both normal and surreal. The army had become my everyday world, but home, a real home, was a memory I replayed often, especially in my quietest moments. So when my commanding officer called me into her office that gray Monday morning in Florence, I was expecting a new order, a fresh challenge, maybe a logistical nightmare to untangle. Instead, she handed me a manila envelope and said, "Sergeant Reed, pack your bags. You're on leave for 2 weeks." I stared at her, speechless for the first time in months, then grinned so wide my cheeks ached. All I could think about was Mark, the house in Charleston, and how much I missed the sound of his laugh. From the moment I knew I was going home, I decided to make it a surprise. I didn't want to call Mark ahead or even send a quick text from the airport. I wanted to see his face when he opened the door and found me standing there, still in my army fatigues, still a little jet-lagged, but so happy to be back. I wanted to be the kind of surprise that made him drop everything and pull me into his arms, the kind of reunion we'd talked about on the phone so many times when the loneliness crept in. I could almost hear his voice in my mind. "Jess, you're here? You came home?" I spent the next day moving through the motions in a haze of excitement. I packed my duffel bag with all the things I thought I'd need: my favorite jeans, the blue sweater Mark always said brought out my eyes, and a handful of gifts from Europe for him. A bottle of Italian wine, a handmade leather wallet, a set of postcards from every city I'd visited. Each item was chosen with care, a piece of my journey to bring back and share with him. I booked a last-minute flight from Florence to Frankfurt, then across the Atlantic to New York. Even the layover at JFK, with its noisy crowds and endless lines, couldn't dampen my mood. I felt like a child on Christmas Eve, counting down the hours. On the final leg of my journey, a flight from New York to Charleston, I watched the clouds part as we descended, and my heart thudded so hard I wondered if the people sitting next to me could hear it. The city looked exactly how I remembered it, with its winding rivers and stretches of green, the kind of place that promised comfort and familiarity. The air was thick and sweet as I stepped outside, a far cry from the crisp chill of Florence. I hailed a cab, my duffel bag wedged beside me on the cracked vinyl seat, and gave the driver my address. I could hardly sit still as we drove through the tree-lined streets, every corner more familiar than the last. It was just after noon when the cab pulled up in front of our house. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at the place that had been the center of all my daydreams. The white picket fence with the gate slightly askew, the ancient oak tree spreading its branches wide across the lawn, the blue shutters that Mark had promised to repaint last spring. Even the porch swing creaked gently in the breeze, just as I remembered. I paid the driver, hoisted my bag onto my shoulder, and made my way up the front steps, my heart pounding harder with every step. I wondered if Mark was home, if he'd be out back gardening, or maybe curled up on the couch watching one of his favorite old westerns. I paused for a moment, the key already in my hand. I considered ringing the doorbell, but the impulse passed quickly. I wanted this to be a genuine surprise, to see his unguarded reaction. So instead, I pressed down on the latch and found, to my surprise, the door was already unlocked. That struck me as odd. Mark was always careful, almost paranoid about security, but I brushed off the unease. telling myself he must have stepped outside for a moment and forgotten. As I stepped inside, the familiar scent of home washed over me, a mix of Mark's cologne, fresh laundry, and the lingering memory of last Christmas's pine wreath. The house was quiet, but from upstairs I heard the unmistakable sound of laughter, light and playful. I smiled, thinking he must be watching something funny on TV, maybe chatting on the phone. I set my bag quietly by the stairs and started up, calling softly, "Mark?" The laughter abruptly stopped. My heart fluttered with anticipation. He must have recognized my voice. I climbed the last few steps, each one filled with hope and longing. But when I reached the landing and turned the corner toward our bedroom, time seemed to grind to a halt. There, in the golden afternoon light streaming through the windows, was Mark. He was sitting on the edge of our bed, bare-chested, his arm around a woman I had never seen before. She was younger than me, with long auburn hair spilling across my pillow, her face turned toward him in easy intimacy. The sheets were tangled around them, and there was no mistaking what had just happened. My world tilted on its axis, and for a moment all I could do was stare, rooted to the spot. Mark's eyes went wide as he saw me. For a split second, an entire universe of shock and guilt flashed across his face, but then it twisted into something else, a mix of anger and annoyance, as if I were the one interrupting. The woman scrambled to pull the sheet around herself, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment or maybe fear. I dropped my bag, the heavy thud echoing in the sudden silence. My knees threatened to give way, and I gripped the doorframe for support. I wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, but the words wouldn't come. My mind flooded with images. Every lonely night I'd spent overseas, every call home, every dollar I'd sent, every letter I'd written. I'd imagined this homecoming 1,000 different ways, but never like this. The betrayal cut deeper than I thought possible, sharper than any wound I'd suffered in the line of duty. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating. Mark finally found his voice, his tone defensive. "Jessica, what are you doing here?" It was almost laughable, the way he said it, as if I was the one out of place. The woman clutched the sheet tighter and looked away, avoiding my eyes. I tried to breathe, tried to steady myself, but everything inside me was unraveling. I took one step back, then another, desperate for air. My vision blurred with tears, and I refused to let them fall. The reality I'd spent years running from, fear of distance, fear of change, fear of losing the man I loved, had found me here, in the home I built, in the life I thought I knew. As I stumbled down the stairs, the laughter that once filled the house now echoed painfully in my mind. A cruel reminder that sometimes the greatest heartbreaks are the ones we never see coming. The seconds after I walked in on Mark and that woman are a blur, fragments of memory stitched together by pain. I remember the woman shrieking, yanking the sheet to cover herself as if I were the intruder in my own home. Mark scrambled for his clothes, stammering nonsense, his voice sounding distant and warped like I was underwater. I stood in the doorway, paralyzed, as their panic played out before me. My body felt numb, but inside I was shattering, splintering along lines I didn't know existed. "Jessica, I didn't expect you." Mark's voice finally broke through, desperate and defensive, but I barely registered his words. I stared at the man I thought I knew, the man I had loved and trusted through years of distance and sacrifice. His hair was rumpled, his face flushed, and as he tugged his shirt over his head, his eyes darted from me to the woman beside him and back again, wild and guilty. For a heartbeat, I thought I might faint. My legs turned to jelly. I pressed my hand to my mouth, trying to stop the sob rising in my throat. The humiliation burned in my chest, spreading through every inch of my body until I thought I might burst into flames. This was the man I sent money to every month. The man I told everything to. The man I planned to build a life with, and he was here breaking every promise with another woman tangled in our sheets. I turned away, stumbling toward the hallway. All I wanted was to escape, to outrun the ache in my chest. But then, just as I reached the stairs, I heard Mark's voice, low and ugly, as he spoke to the woman. "My crazy wife lives outside the country. She thinks she loves me, but the truth is I only love the money she sends me. That's all that matters." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stopped dead, my ears ringing, my vision swimming with fresh tears. For a second, I thought I must have misheard him. But the silence that followed was heavy with confirmation. The woman didn't argue. She just laughed, a harsh, mean little sound that snapped whatever restraint I had left. Something inside me broke. I spun on my heel and stormed back into the bedroom. Mark's face went pale when he saw me, and the woman shrank away, clutching the sheet tighter. I was shaking, whether from anger or heartbreak, I couldn't tell. My voice came out raw and jagged, louder than I intended. "How could you?" I screamed, the words torn from the deepest part of me. "How could you say that? After everything I've done for you, after all the sacrifices, all the love, all the trust?" My hands trembled so badly, I clenched them into fists, my nails digging into my palms. Mark tried to interrupt, his mouth working uselessly. "Jess, I can explain." "No, you can't," I shouted back, my voice cracking. "You don't get to explain this. You don't get to stand there and pretend like this is my fault." I advanced on him, rage propelling me forward. For the first time in my life, I was completely, utterly furious at him, at her, at myself for not seeing the signs. The woman bolted, scurrying past me and disappearing down the stairs, leaving only the echo of her footsteps and the slam of the front door. I barely noticed her go. My focus was all on Marka and his cowardice, his betrayal, the casual cruelty of his words. I slapped him hard, my hand stinging on impact. "You used me," I spat. "You used my love, my money, everything. I trusted you, Mark. I trusted you with my whole life." He staggered back, shock etched on his face. "Jess, please, let's talk about this. It's not what it looks like. I still love you. I made a mistake." I laughed bitterly, tears streaming down my cheeks. "A mistake? You call this a mistake?" My voice broke, ragged with disbelief. "No, Mark, this is a choice. You chose to betray me. You chose to lie over and over again. And for what? For money." He hung his head, but I was done listening. The years I'd spent away, the sleepless nights, the endless worry, I realized then that I'd been holding on to an illusion. The man I thought I loved had disappeared long ago, replaced by someone small and selfish, someone who saw me as nothing more than a bank account. The grief was suffocating. I felt hollowed out, a shell standing in the wreckage of my own life. I couldn't bear to look at him any longer. I turned away and forced myself to breathe, to focus on what needed to happen next. I gathered my duffel bag from the hallway, my hands trembling as I zipped it up. My movements felt mechanical and distant, as if I were watching someone else live this nightmare. I didn't want to spend another minute in that house, in that city, anywhere near Mark. As I walked out the front door, the warm Charleston air felt heavy on my skin. I called my friend Claire, another army officer who lived on the other side of town. She'd always told me I was welcome if I ever needed a place to stay, but I never imagined I'd need her for something like this. She answered on the first ring, her voice full of concern. Within half an hour, she arrived, wrapped me in a hug, and brought me back to her apartment. I fell apart in her guest room, sobbing into the pillow until I had nothing left but exhaustion. The next morning, I woke up hollow and aching, but with a new resolve settling in my chest. I called a lawyer, Rebecca Harris, whose reputation for fighting for women's rights was legendary in Charleston. I told her everything, voice trembling but determined.
"He cheated on me. He used me for my money. I want a divorce."
"And I want justice." Rebecca listened carefully, then told me in no uncertain terms that I had a strong case not just for divorce, but for compensation. She explained that, under South Carolina law, I could file for divorce on grounds of adultery and emotional distress, and that I could seek to recover the money I'd sent Mark during our marriage. For the first time since the betrayal, I felt a flicker of hope, a sense of agency, of power returning to my hands. Filing the papers was painful, but necessary. I gathered the bank statements, the letters, and the evidence of his infidelity. Rebecca's sharp mind and fierce advocacy became my shield. Mark tried to call, text, to beg for forgiveness, but I blocked his number. I couldn't let him hurt me again. Each step I took, each document signed, each decision made was a step toward reclaiming myself. The heartbreak didn't disappear overnight. There were nights when the pain seemed endless, when I doubted my worth and replayed every moment searching for the place where it all went wrong. But slowly, with the help of friends, my lawyer, and the quiet strength I built over years in the army, I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, The end of this chapter could become the beginning of something new. The weeks that followed my decision to file for divorce were some of the hardest of my life. Each day felt like wading through deep water, fighting the drag of exhaustion and heartbreak. The house in Charleston that once meant hope and homecoming now seemed like an empty shell, echoing with memories of laughter and plans that would never be. But I pressed on, buoyed by the support of my friends and the unwavering determination I'd learned through years of military service. My lawyer, Rebecca, became both my shield and my compass. She was fierce and organized, and had a way of making me feel like no matter what Mark threw our way, we would win. The court case itself was brutal, a storm of paperwork, depositions, and emotions I hadn't known I could feel. Mark tried to turn the tables at every step. He painted himself as the lonely husband, abandoned by a wife who cared more about her career than her marriage. He insisted the money I sent was a gift, not an obligation. But the evidence was on my side. Rebecca meticulously compiled every bank record, every deployment letter, every email and message that showed the sacrifices I'd made to support our life together. We even had the testimony of our neighbor, Mrs. Langley, a retired school teacher with a sharp memory and an even sharper tongue. She described in detail the women she'd seen coming and going from the house while I was away. Her testimony alone left the courtroom in stunned silence. Sitting on the witness stand, I told my truth. I spoke not just about the betrayal, but about the years spent in service to my country and my marriage. I described the pride I took in my work and the way I clung to the belief that love and loyalty could bridge any distance. My hands shook as I spoke, but my voice remained steady. I looked at Mark, sitting across the room with that same smug defensiveness he'd worn since the day I walked in on him. And I realized I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt pity. For a man who had everything he needed and still chose to throw it all away. When the judge finally ruled, it felt less like a victory and more like a breath after nearly drowning. Mark was ordered to pay back every cent I had sent him during our marriage, over $60,000. The judge declared that his actions were not just a betrayal of trust, but a calculated exploitation. The house, the one I had once decorated with such hope, was put up for sale, and the proceeds were split between us. I walked out of the courthouse lighter, as if the years of distance and heartache had finally been shed from my shoulders. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about reclaiming my dignity, about proving to myself that I was worth more than what he had reduced me to. Packing up my share of the belongings was bittersweet. I went through each room, sorting what to keep and what to leave behind. The blue sweater Mark loved went into the donation pile, but the old photo albums, the medals from my years of service, and the stack of letters from my friends and family came with me. Claire and a couple of my other Army friends showed up to help, filling the empty house with warmth and laughter. There was a sense of ceremony to it, a quiet acknowledgement that this chapter, painful as it had been, was finally closing. With my portion of the money, I made a decision that surprised even me. I moved to Boston. I'd always loved the city, the energy of its cobblestone streets, the hum of students and professionals weaving through centuries-old buildings, the way the Charles River sparkled at sunset. I found a small apartment overlooking the river, with just enough space for a cozy bed, a desk by the window, and shelves for my growing collection of books and souvenirs from my travels. It was the first space I'd ever had that was truly, unapologetically mine. The Army honored my remaining years of service with a stateside post, which gave me the time and stability I needed to heal and plan for my future. I threw myself into my work, determined to excel not just for myself, but for every woman who'd ever been told she couldn't do it all. In the evenings, I walked along the river, breathing in the crisp New England air and watching the city lights twinkle on the water. I signed up for classes at a local university, using my GI Bill to study international relations, a subject that fascinated me and seemed to tie together my past, present, and future. Boston offered me a kind of anonymity and freedom I'd never known. I joined a running club, volunteered at a shelter for military families, and started making friends who knew me not as Mark's wife or the heartbroken officer, but simply as Jessica. For the first time, I let myself imagine a future built on my terms, unburdened by the weight of someone else's expectations or betrayals. It wasn't always easy. There were nights when the loneliness crept in, when the city felt too big and the silence of my apartment too deep. But over time, the pain softened, replaced by a new sense of strength and clarity. I realized that what I'd survived had changed me, but it hadn't broken me. Instead, it had made me braver, more compassionate, and more certain of my worth. 3 years have passed since that day in court, and every morning when I wake up to the sunlight streaming over the Charles, I feel grateful for the journey, even the heartbreak. I've built a life I'm proud of, filled with good work, true friends, and the quiet, steady joy of knowing I survived. I even started sharing my story with other women at veterans groups, in university classrooms, and sometimes just over coffee with someone who needs to hear it. I tell them what I learned the hard way, that you are never defined by someone else's betrayal, that you can survive and even thrive after heartbreak, that you are enough just as you are. My story isn't one of defeat, but of resilience. I am not the woman who was left behind, or the one whose love was wasted. I am the woman who found her strength in the ashes, who built something new from the ruins. And if you're reading this, if you've ever doubted your worth or wondered if you'll make it to the other side, trust me. Sometimes the hardest goodbyes are the ones that set us free.